Well, I'm here today to throw down a challenge to evidence-based medicine. First of all, I've got to begin with a conflict of interest statement, and the conflict of interest statement is this. Along with some colleagues, I'm involved in a patient adverse event reporting website called risk.org. And I really do want you to pay heed to this and go into it and use it and tell any of the people you know who are on any pills of any sort and anything strange and unusual happening to them on pills to go and report it. But the talk you're going to hear might sound like it's a sales pitch for risk.org. It's not. The talk you're going to hear came first, and risk.org came as an answer to the issues you're going to hear about. You need to hear about it up front, though, because you may have your doubts about all this and may want to ask me about it at the end. What we're looking at is something like this. I believe there's a crisis in medicine that's comparable to the crisis facing the Catholic Church 10 or 12 years ago on the issues of child abuse. Here's the Pope with the cardinals from the United States. They're convened to try and sort out a problem that's begun to emerge. People have talked about being abused by priests and bishops or whatever, and the church is trying to work out how it's going to respond. The credibility of the church is on the line, and medicine and healthcare generally, what I'm going to put to you today, is in a very comparable position to what the church was in then. Our credibility is on the line, and we need to sort things out just the way, you know, the Catholic Church got their issues sorted out extremely well. Well, we need to see if we can do as well. Now, in the case of the church, probably very few of you here come from that kind of worldview, that we can put things right by going into a box and confess our sins and take a wafer and get involved in rituals. But in fact, any of you who are evidence-based medicine adherents these days are likely to be doing exactly the same thing. The wafer is controlled trials, and you've got rituals about publishing data and things like that, that you think are going to sort problems out in almost the same magical way that the church feels that the sacraments do. The issues we're facing today are issues that are caught here in this particular slide. The woman on the right, when she sees things happening on a plane that she's flying, trouble, problems, a near miss, when she reports them, everybody pays heed to her. The woman on the left, when she sees things going wrong and she reports them, a near miss, whatever, no one pays heed to her. Her observations are regarded as anecdotes. Your observations about the effects of pills will be regarded as anecdotal. They'll be put in a box and disregarded. And what we've got to try and do is try and restore our ability, your ability, to believe the evidence of your own eyes. I'm going to try and persuade you that you're operating in a world these days, whether you're the clinician or the patient, where you're being told you cannot believe the evidence of your own eyes. And that's what we've got to try and solve. Now, there's a lot of people who are adherents of evidence-based medicine, and I'm one of them. I mean, I believe in controlled trials, that they can be useful. I believe in an evidence-based medicine approach towards trying to get hold of all of the data and try and work out from having all of the data what treatments really do. That's all a good thing to be doing. But those people who really believe, who are the true believers, think the only thing that's wrong with evidence-based medicine is its corruption by the pharmaceutical industry. The fact that industry don't publish all of the clinical trials that they do, the fact that they ghostwrite trials, the fact that they miscode the data in trials, the fact that they use statistics to obscure problems. We're going to go through all of these issues. The message here is, if only industry didn't have their muddy hands on the pure sacrament of controlled trials, everything will be okay. We'd be able to sort things out. And the answer, or what I'm going to be putting to you is, no, everything wouldn't be okay, because controlled trials don't do this. They're not sacramental in this sense. Let's begin with the ghostwriting issues. And again, this is only going to be awfully brief. It's just to try, I mean, there'll be a bunch of you here in the room who are committed to evidence-based medicine and will feel that the only issues are the corruption from industry. I want to take your concerns on board and make sure you realize that I fully know what all these issues are, but that after that, there are even bigger problems. Let's take a controlled trial, one of the most famous controlled trials there is at this stage. This is study 329, which is a study of paroxetine, which is one of the SSRIs in children who are depressed. And this appears in the journal with the highest impact factor in child psychiatry. It appears with an authorship line to die for. The names on this authorship line are the people who are the biggest names in the field. The average doctor over in the United States seeing these names saying that this drug is safe and effective to give to children who are depressed will think, I must race out there and put every kid I can see who's remotely depressed and anxious on this drug. I mean, the article appears in the Bible and it's authored by the saints, okay? In fact, however, the true author is not there on the authorship line. This is a ghost-written study. 3 years beforehand, GlaxoSmithKline that produced the drug have concluded that our drug does not work. In this trial, did not work for children who are depressed. What are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to pick the good bits of the data out and we're going to publish those, and that's what you see here. A scandal. But just in case you think this is a rare thing, I've been able to pick out some rare scandal. I want to persuade you otherwise. We're going to be dealing mainly in this talk with the antidepressants, but everything I say applies to any other drug that you or your parents or your family or your friends may be on, whether they're respiratory drugs or gut drugs or any other kind of drugs, painkillers for arthritis, whatever. The same thing applies to the lot. FDA get to see the clinical trials that are done that bring drugs on the market. And here's the group of antidepressants that are on the market at the moment, the ones most widely used. And here are the clinical trials that were done to bring these drugs to the market. Up on the upper half of the line, you see the white boxes, which are published trials saying, in each case, that this drug works extremely well and is effective. They're positive publications for the drug. There's 3 black boxes that you see there. They're negative publications for the drug. Based on the data you see here, we've got groups like the Cochrane reviewers. There's the NICE guidelines. There's a range of other groups who are in the business of trying to sift the evidence for all the rest of us, getting hold of all the trials that have been published and trying to work out, well, which of the antidepressants is the one we should use, or which arthritic drugs should we use, or asthma drugs should we use. In the case of the antidepressants, the Cochrane reviewers, as you see here in an article that appeared in The Lancet, based on the kind of data you've seen there, concluded that we should be using sertraline. Let me just go back a slide. Sertraline is the 3rd drug on the right there. You see boxes 61 and 62. There's only 2 positive publications, but the Cochrane reviewers have looked at the strength of the publications and concluded that if you're a doctor and thinking about using one of these drugs, what you should be using is the 1/3 from the right, sertraline, and that's the article that you see here. FDA, however, get to see more than the published articles. They get to see other trials have been done that aren't necessarily published. And if you look at the full cohort of trials that FDA got to see, the picture looks like this. You now see that half the trials were done on these drugs were negative trials for the drug. There's a number of new trials there that you hadn't seen before, but there's also a number of old trials there that were white boxes before but are now black boxes. 1/3 of the positive publications that you saw on the previous slide, in fact, FDA had concluded were negative studies for the drug. If you're going to pick out the worst antidepressant to use, well, the worst one is obviously the 3rd drug from the right, sertraline, Zoloft, where only 20% of the trials are positive, 80% are negative. One of the positive trials you saw before, in fact, was a negative trial. So if you think there are bodies out there like the NICE guidelines or the Cochrane reviewers or any other people you care to think about who have no links to the pharmaceutical industry, who are disinterestedly looking at the evidence and can come up with the right answer, you're mistaken. The way the system works, industry control it completely, and the Cochrane reviewers and the NICE guidelines have become a marketing tool for the pharmaceutical industry. The best kind of marketing tool because they're not paid by industry. And this returns us to this slide here. As of 2004, a fuss blew up about children becoming depressed on the antidepressants. In terms of the published literature at that point in time of trials done with antidepressants in the case of children who were depressed, 100% of these trials were ghost-written. In terms of the published literature completely said that these drugs work effectively and are safe, and we now know that in every single case where that was said, that was wrong. There is a complete mismatch between what the published literature says on the one side and what the data, when we get access to it, says on the other side. This is the greatest known divide in all of medicine, but is not unique to antidepressants and is not unique to children. It applies to every other drug that you may be taking. So that's dealt with the first 2 points there. We're going to rattle through these trivial and superficial issues first before we get on to the deeper issues. Miscoding and mislocation of the data. Where the previous slide said miscoding. Let me quickly tell you about miscoding. If any of you go on an antidepressant and become suicidal, there's a good chance that you may be described or coded as treatment non-responsive. You may drop out of the trial and you'll be coded as a dropout. You won't be coded as becoming suicidal. You may be coded as having become more depressed. You may be coded as having nausea. If you had nausea and agitation and were also suicidal, well, if the first thing you had was nausea, chances are you'll be coded as nauseated rather than anything else. But mislocation of the data is one of the other things that happens, so I'm just going to touch on these things briefly before moving on. There's the distribution of the suicidal acts that happened in the clinical trials of these 3 drugs. One of the tricky periods is what's called the washout period there at the top, when if you go into a trial before the trial proper starts, you're taken off drugs you were on before you then get randomized to either the active drug or the placebo. Now, this is a tricky period, as we know now, the period where you're washed out from previous drugs. You're quite likely to go on to a suicidal act. But of course, it's a period when you're on nothing. And being on nothing is the same as being on placebo, isn't it? Well, certainly what the pharmaceutical industry would like you to believe and what they were prepared to say to the regulators and others, because the published literature on the distribution of the suicidal acts in these trials, in fact, looks like that. That's what's published. I've explained to you what happened to the balls up there at the top. Look down at the bottom where you see there's the point at which the control trial proper stops. And then you've got a red ball which is moved up above the line. Let me explain to you what happened in the case of one of those red balls. These were paroxetine trials. And after the trial was over, a person on placebo in the trial, in the 30-day period after the randomized phase is over, the doctor has the option then to put them on active treatment. And in this man's case, he was put on Prozac, and he went on 10 days later to commit suicide, and he's classified as a paroxetine placebo suicide. I mean, paroxetine trial, suicide that happened on placebo, not on the SSRI. That's what ghostwriting and mislocation gets you. The use of statistics to obscure. Well, this is nothing to do with ghostwriting and non-publication. This is where we enter into a realm that's more problematic again. And the realm is this, that evidence, the believing the evidence of your own eyes. We don't believe the evidence of doctors or patients' eyes because they're biased. Doctors bring bias to treatment. We need to control this bias with controlled trials. That's why you recruit hundreds of patients and have a range of different doctors to have a look at what's actually happening to the patient on treatment. Now, if the treatment does no good at all, what the observations will look like is this. I mean, when I say no good, I mean if it has no particular effect for good or bad, right? This is what the observations will look like. There'll be a bunch of doctors or a bunch of patients who think actually the treatments work quite well, and their observations lie over to the left of the 1.0 line, and a bunch of doctors who think that the treatment didn't work all that well, and their observations will lie over to the right. But broadly speaking, if you look at the distribution, the peak of the curve will lie over 1.0. If the treatment works well, the curve shifts left. If the treatment works poorly, the curve shifts right. Now, when the first anecdotal reports came in about Prozac causing people to commit suicide, you had observations by doctors putting patients on Prozac who became suicidal. After the drug was stopped, the problem cleared up. You put the patient back on the drug, the problem reappears. It was very convincing evidence the drug was making people suicidal. The response from the companies and the regulators and the GMC and the FBI and the SAS and the DOH and everyone else you care to think of was, these are anecdotes. Let's have a look at what the science says. So this article appeared in the BMJ saying, well, actually the science shows there's no problem. When you take all of the controlled trials, which are going to handle the issue of the bias of doctors and patients, this is what the controlled trials look like. A bit hard to make out what that's showing to you. Let me show you what it actually boils down to. It's this. That's what the curve looks like. There's a shift to the right. There's a doubling of the rate of suicidal acts on Prozac compared to placebo in these trials. Okay, the company go on to draw a conclusion that everyone here in this room should agree with, and the BMJ who published the article agreed with, and 100,000 people who read the BMJ who have no links to the pharmaceutical industry, don't work in the mental health field, and have no particular reason to think that the company has this wrong. They all can agree with this particular statement, and did agree with it, which is that analyzing the incidence of the suicidal acts on Prozac in this case shows no statistically significant increased risk on Prozac compared to placebo. Everybody can agree with that. But you shouldn't agree with the next statement the company makes. It runs straight on from this to the next statement, which nobody who reads the BMJ, 100,000 people read the BMJ, most have no links to the pharmaceutical industry, but nobody objected to this statement, which is data from these trials do not show an increase in risk. Now, I would put it to you that you take an 8-year-old or 12-year-old and ask them, is there an increase in risk on Prozac here? They would say to you, yes, there is. This scientific data is totally consistent with the observations of patients and doctors reporting that Prozac is making them suicidal. But actually the scientific evidence has been used to discredit the observation of your own eyes. You're being told you may think it's that way, that's what you seem to see, but that's not what's happening. The fact that there's a chance that the data didn't arise by virtue of the drug, that it could have arisen by chance, is you're being asked to reinterpret that to mean that there was no increase. Let me show you what's going on. You'll know that during the 1960s, the tobacco industry ran a campaign that has later been called the Doubt Is Our Product campaign. And this showed the effort was to say to people who started to think that maybe smoking causes lung cancer and heart attacks, to show graphs of increasing life expectancy during the 20th century. From the start of the century to the end of the 1960s, people were living longer and smoking more. And the tobacco industry said to people, look, this couldn't be happening if what those guys out there are saying is true, that our drug causes you to get lung cancer and heart attacks. They were trying to sow doubt in your mind. Well, what you're seeing here is the most sophisticated version of the doubt is our product strategy that we've ever had, which is, there's the data for the SSRIs and what it looks like. There's a twofold increase in risk of people going on to a completed suicide or a suicidal act on these drugs. The data is statistically significant. Now, let's say we introduce the next generation of drugs, the TTSJ, and TTSJ just means S plus 1 and R plus 1 and I plus 1. I mean, there's no such group of drugs as the TTSJs, okay? But let's say we have the next group of drugs. And let's say the data looks like this, that there's an 8-fold increase in risk in people going on to a completed suicide or a suicidal act on these drugs. But the data is not statistically significant. What the pharmaceutical industry are saying to you, and what the MHRA in this country are saying to you, and FDA in the United States, and the DOH, and the BMJ, and everybody else that you care to think of, that the safe drug, the drug, if you have to take one of these two drugs, the safe drug for you to take is a TTSJ, the SSRIs are the dangerous drugs. In fact, TTSJs are 4 times riskier than SSRIs. Do not take the TTSJ if you have an option. Doctors, however, are being trained to regard the SSRIs as the only risky drug here. They will fail their exams if they say TTSJs have any risk at all linked to them. If there's a chance that the TTSJ observations have arisen by chance, and there is a terribly small chance that they did, that chance is being interpreted as evidence that there is no risk. This comes back to the point that I've been trying to make to you. The evidence of your own eyes has been discredited in front of your own eyes. Right. This doesn't just apply to the group of drugs that you've seen here. In the case of most of the major drug disasters in recent years, exactly the same thing is applied. You've all heard of the painkiller Vioxx. In the major trial of it, it was compared to another painkiller called naproxen. There were 4,300 patients in the Vioxx arm of the trial, 4,300 patients in the naproxen arm of the trial. There were 3 heart attacks on Vioxx that were removed from the mix by the company. And this sounds horrific to most people. But what should be more horrific is the fact that the company published an article in JAMA, which is also read by 100,000 people, showing 17 heart attacks in the 4,300 patients taking Vioxx versus 4 heart attacks in the 4,300 patients taking naproxen, and said there is no increased risk in heart attacks on Vioxx compared to naproxen. Not a single person wrote into JAMA and said, that's wrong. Look, it's obvious that there's an increase in risk. If they'd left the 3 missing heart attacks in there, the data would have been statistically significant, so you see why 3 heart attacks had to be removed. But they're hiding much more heart attacks in broad light of day. It's there in the paper, and people can't see that this increase in risk is an increase in risk. Now, one of the big issues in recent weeks, and it's literally just last week this issue came to a head, was the issue of access to the data. When industry run trials, they hide the data. No one has access to the data afterwards, and a lot of people have been saying for a long time we can solve most of these problems if we just have access to the data. That led the BMJ to run this campaign 2 or 3 weeks ago, saying that, look, the key thing here is we've got to insist on access to the data from the trials the pharmaceutical industry run. There was a meeting last week in the European Medicines Agency because EMA have offered to make the data from these clinical trials publicly available, and the pharmaceutical industry has fought back. There was an offer that was all over the BMJ about 2 or 3 weeks ago by GlaxoSmithKline saying, of course we believe in transparency. We will make the data available to selected scientists rather than to the public at large, or mavericks who come from places like North Wales. We'll make the data available for people to look at. If the GlaxoSmithKline proposal, which is not just a GlaxoSmithKline proposal, but it's an industry-wide proposal, is the one that wins out, we will be in a worse position than we are at the moment with the current lack of access that we've got. But I want to move on to trickier issues. The word evidence, as in evidence-based medicine, is an interesting word. In French, evidence means what is evident. In English, evidence means, of course, what's not evident. It's all about persuading you to take things that it's not evident that you should be taking. You will never see a controlled trial for a parachute. It's evident that these things work. You will be faced from time to time with going to your doctor and being offered treatment A or treatment B, and you'll be told that treatment A gets on the market because there was 20 patients in the trial, and treatment B gets on the market because there's 10,000 patients in the trial that was done. Which of these drugs do you think you want to have? And of course you'll say, or most people will say, well, I'd prefer the drug that had the 10,000 people in the trial. And your doctor will push you that way too. It sounds like a much better drug to be having, when in fact that's snake oil. If it takes 10,000 people, or even 1,000 in the trial to get this drug to be shown to work, you're dealing with something like snake oil, and you should have gone for the treatment where it only took 20 people to show that it worked. Or even a treatment we can show it works without controlled trials. If a treatment really works, we don't need controlled trials. Controlled trials work best, or were introduced to keep drugs that don't work off the market. They shouldn't be the fuel for therapeutic bandwagons. Now I want to bring the point home to you. Controlled trials could be used, or have been used, and have shown that most of the drugs you see here work very well as antidepressants. The one on the upper right is ephedra. It's a stimulant, and dexamphetamine and methylphenidate have all been shown in controlled trials to be antidepressants. The one on the bottom right's nicotine, that's tobacco, and a lot of cholinergic drugs of one sort or the other, from atropine through to nicotine, have been shown to be effective antidepressants in controlled trials. The one on the lower left is opium, obviously, and the opiates have a long track record in Europe of being given to severely depressed people, much more depressed people than respond to the SSRIs, and working very effectively. The one on the upper left we're going to deal with now in a minute. That's where the rest of the talk is going to go to. But of course the one in the middle, does anyone know what the one in the middle is? Broccoli contains benzodiazepines in large amounts. It's the only foodstuff around the place that does. And the benzodiazepines have all been shown in controlled trials of depression to be effective antidepressants, as effective as the SSRIs. But let's focus on the drug that most of us would prefer, which is the one on the upper left. I'm going to persuade you that if alcohol had only been only introduced lately, so that the pharmaceutical industry could take out a patent on it, that it would be very easy to introduce it as an antidepressant. In the case of the SSRIs and other antidepressants, we only run 6-week trials of these drugs. We'd only have to run a 6-week trial of alcohol. We don't have to show that the drugs save lives to get an antidepressant on the market, or even that they get people back to work. We show changes on rating scales. In the case of alcohol, it would help you fall asleep, it would make you less anxious, less irritable, and a range of things like this. It is for certain that on the rating scales we use, you would show beneficial therapeutic effects of alcohol in a 6-week trial, so that in at least 1 out of the 5 trials we did, which if you remember was the rate that sertraline showed positive results, we would get a positive result for alcohol. If we'd run 2 positive trials out of 10 trials were done. We don't need to let the rest of the world know about the other 8 negative studies. From the 2 positive studies, we can produce 100 positive publications. In the case of some of the drugs that have been used in the mental health field, for every single trial that was done, there is on average 50 positive publications that come out of the one trial. So we can produce lots of publications saying that alcohol works extraordinarily well as an antidepressant. We can accentuate the positive in the sense that clearly in an alcohol trial, alcohol is going to beat placebo. You know, red wine, nice red wine, good quality red wine is going to beat Ribena or whatever it is we compare it to. But Ribena may do quite well as well. However, when the results come out with alcohol marginally beating Ribena, we will be able to put the entire positive effects of alcohol down to alcohol and nothing to do with placebo effects. We can have a Mexican component to our alcohol trial. In the case of one of the drugs on the market for mood stabilization at the moment, Abilify, what they did was they had a 32-center trial, 30 centers in the United States and 2 in Mexico. If you look at the trial results that come out of the 30 centers in the United States, Abilify does not beat placebo. In the 2 Mexican centers, the placebo effects are 0, the Abilify effects are extraordinary and tremendous. There's a huge difference. And when you add the 2 Mexican centers into the US centers, what do you know? Overall, the 32 centers combined show a marginal benefit for Abilify over placebo. And FDA, although they notice this and this strange pattern of results, still license Abilify for mood stabilization. So if they do that for Bristol Myers Squibb, they'd presumably do it the same for us in alcohol as well. Now, in the case of wine, let's say David and I have brought wine on the market, but a few of the rest of you have got sort of cottoned onto this good idea and thought, well, let's try the same for gin and whiskey and beer. We can prove that all of these work as well, and we can bring them all on the market. And there will be patients within a short period of time when wine hasn't worked, their doctor will have put them on a combination of wine and gin and whiskey and beer and rum, because these all work. And if one drug hasn't worked, we should be putting you on 4 or 5 drugs that work. There'll be no recognition that essentially you're being put on 5 different versions of the same thing. We can even do the same thing with Scotch and Irish and Japanese Scotch whiskey. There's no reason why not. This treatment, alcohol, will be endorsed by NICE guidelines. With clever publication strategies, NICE may endorse it as the #1 treatment for depression, particularly if the company producing the drug is based here in the UK and threatened to leave the country if NICE doesn't play ball. You know for certain that we will have health economists who will be able to analyze the data from 6-week trials and prove that taking alcohol that if large numbers of the population take alcohol, that it will save the economy money. And of course, the other key thing about this is on the basis of 6-week trials of alcohol where we show a marginal benefit, you will be told you need to take this drug for life. You have a lifelong condition and you need to continue taking it. What about the side effects of alcohol? Well, in 6 to 8 week trials, the effects are probably not going to appear particularly. I mean, most of them aren't going to appear. If they do appear, we only need to report the side effects that are happening at a 10% rate or more. We don't have to report things that may be happening to 4 to 5% of the people in the trial. If there are adverse effects that a doctor like David Linden reports, they'll be dismissed as anecdotes. They're not significant. In the case of pregnancy, there will be no evidence. You will be told, pregnant women will be told that you have to take alcohol during pregnancy, because if you leave your nervous disorder untreated, this is going to cause birth defects to your unborn child. Compared with the SSRIs in 6-week trials, where they show a doubling of the rate of people going on to commit suicide and a doubling of the rate of violent acts, including homicide, there will be no such increase on alcohol. It will be a lot better and a lot safer. In the case of people trying to stop alcohol a few months later and finding it difficult, that they've got withdrawal problems, they'll be told, well, this is the illness that we were treating you for in the first instance reappearing. It is nothing to do with you being dependent on alcohol. This is exactly what we do with the SSRIs. On the pregnancy issue, I should tell you that the SSRIs double the rate of birth defects, double the rate of miscarriages, increase the rate of voluntary terminations, and may be leading to the children born of women on these drugs through pregnancy to have learning disabilities later in life. That certainly wouldn't be the case with alcohol in modest quantities. If there are liver function test problems that show up in alcohol, we can get doctors. There's no problem finding a doctor. Some report in the literature somewhere that people who are depressed have liver enzyme elevations. So the liver enzyme elevations will be put down to the depression, nothing to do with alcohol. Within a few months, we will be able to convert the entire medical field to believing that any liver function problems that seem to be happening on alcohol are down to the illness. Once the drug is made available on prescription only, its risks vanish. You can even have alcohol sold in the supermarket down the road, and you will perceive its risks as being completely different to the alcohol you get from David Linden. As happens in the case of the amphetamines, we give dexamphetamine in large and increasing amounts to children, and we regard it as harmless and safe compared with the dexamphetamine you get on the street, which is a disaster and to be avoided at all costs. Doctors are a risk laundering system when it comes to drugs. But they perform one useful task for the pharmaceutical industry. If they say that, well, even if they've been warned that there was risks linked to alcohol, that they would still have used it, you cannot take a legal action against the pharmaceutical company producing alcohol. Now, here's another interesting thing, and we're going to get on. We're heading towards the denouement of the talk. These slides are left behind here, and if anyone wants them, you can have them, and you may want them if only to prove to yourself that what I'm about to tell you is true. Though, given the audience I'm talking to, you guys may well have seen all this before and know what's coming next, which is that the two tables you see there are exactly the same size and shape. You might have to print out the slide and trace one of the tables and superimpose it on the other to prove it to yourself. If you do that, you will find that they are exactly the same size and shape. But even after you do that, they will still look different. You cannot overcome the illusion. It's a trick of perspective. And the pharmaceutical industry have a comparable trick of perspective. And here it is. This came about when Prozac was fingered as causing people to become suicidal. And the response from the company producing Prozac was this: you've got to tell people out there the problem is in the disease, not the drug. And the reason we now know that the SSRIs cause people to become suicidal is the trials for these relatively weak and ineffective antidepressants were done in people who are mildly to moderately depressed because they don't work in people who are severely depressed. But of course, people with mild to moderate depression are not at risk of going on to commit suicide, so the placebo rates of suicidal acts were in fact extraordinarily low, and the risks inherent in the drugs were obvious as a consequence. So that's what the controlled trial data shows. And FDA and MHRA and FBI and DOH will all say that these controlled trials prove that antidepressants cause people to become suicidal and commit a suicidal act. They don't. Here's a meeting that happened in Cambridge when the first of the antidepressants was introduced, one of the tricyclic antidepressants called imipramine, 50 years ago. So a year after it has come out, a bunch of doctors are convened, and here's one of them saying, look, I think one of the problems on this new drug, which is a great drug, treats people who are depressed extraordinarily well, gets people who are severely depressed well, but a number of people that go on this drug become intensely anxious afterwards. One of the other doctors at the same meeting said, yes, this is what I've seen too. The patients, after a few days on the drug, complain of dreams of aggressive content. They're feeling aggressive and homicidal towards their family and friends. This state is accompanied by great anxiety and suicidal impulses. The symptoms disappear when the drug is stopped or when the dosage is reduced. You go on the drug, the problem appears. You stop the drug, it goes away. You go back on the drug, it reappears again. This is cause and effect, looking straight at the person and believing the evidence of your own eyes. This is an era before clinical trials have been introduced. Doctors still believe the evidence of their own eyes. Here it is again at the same meeting. One more doctor saying, yes, I've noticed that some patients become agitated. Now, this is a more effective drug than the SSRIs, a much more potent drug. In clinical trials, as compared to the SSRIs, it beats the SSRIs. So we can put this drug into a trial of people who are more severely depressed, at greater risk of going on to commit suicide, right? And if we did this, the data might look like this. First of all, because you're taking a group of patients who are severely depressed, the rate at which patients on placebo go on to a suicidal act would be higher than it was before. There's a group of people who are going to become suicidal on imipramine, but it's also going to reduce the suicidality in the patients that it effectively treats. So the outcome data might look like this, that the drug seems to be preventive against people committing suicide. This is a drug that causes some people to commit suicide. In clinical trials, the FDA and the MHRA and the SAS and the DOH and the FBI and the CIA would all say that there is no evidence here that this drug causes people to commit suicide. That they'd say just the opposite. The only thing you can conclude about this drug is that it doesn't cause people to commit suicide. The control trials are wrong. In every case where you have a drug that produces a symptom that the illness can also produce, the control trials cannot answer the question for you. Just fundamentally can't. Let me show you this, though. This might interest you just as much. In 2006, GlaxoSmithKline are faced with a big problem. They've done a bunch of trials in people who have major depressive disorder, and this is what the data looks like. There's 11 suicidal acts in close to 3,000 patients taking paroxetine versus 0 suicidal acts in close to 2,000 patients taking placebo. The data is statistically significant. The company is about to be forced to say our drug causes people to commit suicide. How do you solve the problem? Well, here's the way you do it. This is 1989. Well, it's not. It's 1994. 5 years after a trial has been run in 1989 by Stuart Montgomery and colleagues in a hospital in London. What they've done is they've taken Prozac and put a group with recurrent brief depressive disorders into a trial and run Prozac against placebo and not published the results. The fact that they published 5 years later has an interesting history behind it. We'll leave that out for the moment. When you read the publication, you see that they concede that, what they say is that there was no increase in the rate of suicidal acts on Prozac compared to placebo. When you get the background documents to this trial, you see that placebo beat Prozac at a p less than or equal to 0.001. You rarely see as conclusive a result of that as that of placebo beating an active drug in a clinical condition. So if you're GlaxoSmithKline and faced with a problem on paroxetine, another SSRI exactly like Prozac, what do? You go back to Stuart Montgomery, you go back to the same London hospital, you go back to probably the same patients who did so poorly on Prozac, and you run a trial of your SSRI compared to placebo. And you abort the trial before it finishes, and you never publish the results, but this is what the results look like. There's a 3-fold increase in risk of people going on to a suicidal act on paroxetine compared to placebo. So we've got 2 trials in this group of patients where SSRIs look like a disaster. So if you're GlaxoSmithKline, what do you do next? Well, you go and run a third trial in exactly this group of patients, this time over in Belgium. There's a bunch of different figures that have come out from this trial, but broadly speaking, I'm going to show you what the results look like, which is that's the problem GlaxoSmithKline are trying to solve, and they're trying to solve it with the clinical trials you've just seen, most of which don't get published. And those clinical trials, one that didn't get published, the one that did produce the data you see down here, okay, again, paroxetine is producing an increased number of suicidal acts compared to placebo. And you mightn't instantly see why this solves their problem. When you add the two groups of figures together, here's the answer you get, which is that all of a sudden paroxetine is preventative of suicidal acts. Now, the way the time sequence here makes it highly likely, well, at least in terms of the publication, what's done with this GlaxoSmithKline publication, the table's not mine, that's theirs, okay? What's being done here is deliberate. They know exactly what they're doing here. Right back at the start, did they know what they're doing? Well, the time sequence suggests they did. And if they did, the issue is this, that they knew exactly what to do to hide a problem that they conceded their drug was causing. They could take the same problem and cause it to hide the problem that the drug is causing. That can be done very deliberately here, may have been done deliberately here. We can accidentally do it in every single clinical trial we do. If you could easily recruit a number of these patients in here, call them major depressive disorder patients and recruit them to your major depressive disorder trial and hide the problem that the trials you see here produce. This will be happening in diabetes trials, in backache trials, in any condition where we don't fully understand what the condition is. So out of that, the answers are clinical trials are not the answer to everything. They're the answer to some things. If both the drug and the illness cause the problem, they aren't the answer. If the clinical population you're dealing with is heterogeneous, that is, if we don't understand the underlying clinical condition, then the trials may not be the answer. If you don't know what you're doing, they aren't the answer. Of course, if you do know what you're doing, you don't need to run trials. They cannot provide patient-level answers, and they certainly don't reveal cause and effect, which is what you're told that they do. There are ways in which clinical trials can be useful, and this is an interesting issue here. Before the clinical trials you've seen got run, Pfizer, in the case of their antidepressant, sertraline, the one that the Cochrane reviewer said you should be using, but it's now clear to all of you is the last antidepressant you should go near, they had run a healthy volunteer trial. All of these companies run healthy volunteer trials. They'd run the trial in Leeds 8 or 9 years before the drug came on the market. 6 women were randomized to sertraline and 6 to placebo. The company terminated the trial early, after a week, after every single woman taking sertraline had dropped out. The company reviewed the data. They didn't need statistical significance tests to conclude our drug caused these women to become agitated and anxious, to have aggressive impulses, probably to become suicidal. Later, when the drug is on the market, being given to people who are depressed and it produced all those things, the company said there is no evidence that our drug caused this problem. We now have clinical trial registers which ensure that trials being done in clinical populations are registered at least. They may not be published, but they're registered so we know they've happened. At least they should be registered. They aren't always. We have no register for healthy volunteer trials. Not only do we have no register, we have massive non-publication of these trials, even though there are no clinical confidentiality issues involved. What you've got here is a drug trial. You are told that the antidepressant trials done in people who are depressed are drug trials. They're not. They're condition trials. This is a drug trial. This is a trial that tests out what the drug is doing. The other way to test what the drug is doing is to run what's called a dose-response trial, but we don't do that either. So we introduced controlled trials as part of an effort to make drugs safer. We did two things back in 1962 when the thalidomide crisis blew up. We made drugs available on prescription only, even though thalidomide had been available over the counter in Germany, and the chances are its risk came to light because doctors didn't make a living out of it. If the antidepressants and a range of drugs are available on prescription only, and because of this, the major hazards of these drugs take 15 or more years to come to light these days because doctors defend the drug. We also introduced controlled trials from 1962 onwards. The idea was to prove that these drugs work and were safe before they were brought on the market. As of 1962, only one drug had been through a placebo-controlled trial before it came on the market, and in this trial it had been proven safe and effective. And that drug was thalidomide. We now have a situation where antidepressants are the most commonly prescribed drugs in pregnancy these days. Women don't take alcohol, don't take soft cheeses or cold meat, don't take tea or coffee, don't have hot showers, but are increasingly told by their doctors they have to take an antidepressant because if you don't treat your nervous problems, your baby is going to be born with birth defects, even though the evidence is that antidepressants double the rate of birth defects, as I've told you. There are other risks with controlled trials. For the men here in the audience, you're past tense, you realize that all of the people going to the major conferences in Boston and Vancouver and elsewhere are going to be the women here in the audience. You're going to be at home looking after the children. And your wife, when she comes home from a major meeting in Vancouver or whatever and walks in the door and sees you looking after two young children that are a handful and perhaps a teenage daughter who's even more difficult to deal with, and your hair is a mess and things like that, she's going to look at you and she's going to say, I just don't fancy him at the moment, okay? Fortunately, she's going to be regarded as having hypoactive sexual desire disorder, and she's going to get her testosterone levels checked. That's what she'll be told by doctors. If she doesn't desire you, it's because her testosterone levels are low. And rather than checking what might be going on in the relationship, but in order to prove a drug works for the hypoactive sexual desire disorder she has, we're going to have rating scales. And the rating scales are going to check on things like clitoral numbness. I mean, you have to have a bunch of items. You're the women here, you're going to be asked to focus on the sensitivity of your clitoris in a way that you were never asked to focus on it before. And in the process, your experience of lovemaking is going to change. It's going to be changed forever. And this is a side effect of controlled trials. It's not just in that domain. It's in a world where, here's Clint Eastwood, as you can see, talking to the patient who isn't in the chair. And that's the world doctors are increasingly in. We do not see the patient anymore. The guidelines tell us what we do, regardless of what the patient in the chair might show. They may as well be invisible. Now, you might think it's a laughing matter, but really it's not for most doctors or anyone who works in healthcare these days, because in my continuing professional development form 2 years ago, I put this down here at the bottom: to avoid being sacked for non-compliance with guidelines, that is, to avoid being sacked for delivering good medical care. Every doctor, anyone working in healthcare, increasingly is in a world these days where if you don't conform to the guidelines, you are at increasing risk of being sacked. If you work in Johns Hopkins University at the moment, if you do not take your mandatory flu vaccination by December the 1st, in a few days' time, you will be sacked, period. So, The woman on the right reports to an adverse event reporting system, the ASRS. The woman on the left reports to the AERS, the adverse event reporting system for doctors. The woman on the right is believed, the woman on the left is not. She's discredited. Her observations are worthless. We've got to reproduce a situation in which the observations of both patients and the women on the right are believed. Of course, part of the reason the woman on the right's observations aren't believed, part of the reason she doesn't kick up a fuss, of course, is compared to the woman on the right who's on the plane that you're on, and if the plane goes down and you die, she does too. The woman on the left is not on the plane she puts you on. She's piloting you from the ground, and if you go down, well, that's tough luck. She's still fine. So what happens now? The sacraments, evidence-based medicine in particular, has failed us. There's two answers to the problem, I think. You can take a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach. You can take a shower or a bidet approach towards the issue. I think the answer has to be a bidet approach. And that's what led to the creation of risk.org, where we want people to go in and report on adverse events that are happening to them on drugs. What we're going to do is, unlike anyone else, well, A, for a start, the FDA have 3.5 million or more reports on adverse events that happen on any of the drugs you conceivably could be on. There's a number of companies in the business over in the States of trying to sell you the FDA data. You know, if I go on Prozac, will I turn blue? They'll charge you $200 for a report. We make all this information available to you for free, and it's worth, I mean, even if you aren't on drugs, you might find out some interesting things about drugs by just going into risk.org. What we're going to be doing, though, is if you guys and anyone else you can find goes onto risk.org and reports anything that's happening on drug, and we're not just talking about heart attacks, we are talking about changes in your hair, changes in your skin, all sorts of things, that we believe that what the way to answer the problem is to get teamwork going between you and your doctor, but also to feed back to people local knowledge. In the FDA data you can see here, you can see that Seroxat causes liver problems. There have been reports of liver problems to FDA. Most of them are coming from Japan. The people who are going to work out what's going on here are the Japanese. They have a real interest trying to work out exactly what's going on. When you make the knowledge local, you can solve the problems. We're going to feed back things so that people in Cardiff might find out their hair turns blue on Prozac, but it's not happening down in Swansea. We believe that the way to solve these things is to give you the information as to what's going on, and you can bring local knowledge to bear on why it's happening here and not there. Okay, thank you. No, I think the issue is we're in a world where no one disputes that drugs can do good, but the drug companies say they can, and I think they can. I mean, I use these drugs. You should not take out of this talk that I don't use the SSRIs or any of these drugs. I do. What happens, though, is we're in a world where the positive effects are hyped and overblown, and that's fine. We could all agree that there are some positive effects. We don't all agree that there are negative effects. The companies just simply do not accept there are negative effects. They do extraordinary things to hide the issues. So it's trying to get an agreement on the full range of effects that a drug has. It's not trying to say they're all bad, don't use them. It's just simply trying to restore a world where people who, I mean, this is what happens. People on a drug called Zyprexa, which is one of the drugs used to stabilize moods, gain 4 or 5 stone in weight. The companies say to you, our controlled trials show no evidence of weight gain. So even in the face of people generally saying he's become Michelin man, your evidence, your ability to believe the evidence of your own eyes is being discredited. We are trying to restore your ability to believe the evidence of your own eyes, and in so doing will probably lead on to the discovery of new and useful effects of drugs. We're not just simply asking you to report the adverse effects. We're asking you, what we do is, if there are things that happen on the drug, we ask you, specifically, okay, this may be a problem in this context, but can you see any other context in which it could be a good thing to be happening? So, and also we ask you about the risk-benefit trade-offs. It's, yeah, the drug may be causing the problem, but you may be happy once you know it's causing the problem to continue with the treatment because you're getting good effects out of it. But at least your mind's more settled if you know that, this is the origin of that particular glitch. You know, my hair's falling out, now I know why it's falling out, but I get such good benefits from the drug that I'm happy to continue. Absolutely, but we've got a problem, which is if the culture doesn't let people recognize what's right in front of their own eyes. As I try to put it, or have tried to put it elsewhere, and ran into serious problems with the Catholic Church because of this particular way of putting it, what Freud did for us was terribly useful. He got us to recognize you couldn't believe everything that a patient says, that behind what they say may lie other meanings completely. You need to be sensitive to these things. But the problem with an exclusively Freudian approach, if that's the only club in the bag that you've got, you end up not believing any stories of abuse at all. There comes a point where you have to believe what the patient's saying. In the same way, control trials terribly usefully, do wonderful things in helping show us the biases that we bring to therapy, that clinical psychologists bring to therapy, doctors bring to therapy, anybody involved in healthcare brings to therapy, and the patient brings too. But if we ever get to the point of not being able to believe the evidence of our own eyes, we're in the comparable position the Catholic Church were in, which is, not accepting the evidence when it gets to a point that it's overwhelming. And that's what we've got to. We have simply, the patient has become invisible in front of us. I'm pleased to hear that you don't go by the guidelines. I'm slightly concerned for you, which is I think there's a growing risk you're going to lose your job if you're systematically not going by the guidelines. So the point is, it's not anti-quantification. I am a great believer in controlled trials, but I'm an even more passionate believer in the idea that they shouldn't be the only golf club in the bag. You picked up two good points, but trying to do it quickly. There is a condition called catatonia where people remain mute and stuporous often for weeks or months. And you can give them high doses of benzodiazepines and they get up off their bed and walk. Within the mental health field, we have drug treatments that work so well, you simply do not need controlled trials for them. Okay? ECT is rather comparable in the case of people who are melancholically depressed or catatonic, or with neuroleptic malignant syndrome, or even Parkinson's disease. It's not a good treatment. What the controlled trials probably show, if we were to do them in people who are much more mildly depressed, it probably isn't a good treatment. We get into a hugely ambiguous area, and this is one to throw open to all of you. It's got memory problems, it seems. Problem here is that we've got doctors saying, well, yes, the patients get ECT and they improve and they're doing the crossword after they've had ECT a few days ago. Where's the cognitive problems here? And the patients are saying, well, actually, a year later, there was a bunch of things that I couldn't remember. Important things from my past that I couldn't actually remember. I think there's no denying the reality. And again, this comes back to the point about placebo-controlled trials are used to deny the evidence of people's own eyes. People on placebo improve. The key thing is the observations that people improve. In terms of the memory issues for ECT, the patients are saying they have a memory problem. We would make a disastrous mistake to deny that they do. The issue is, what does this arise from? By the time they get ECT, they've had benzodiazepines, which clearly cause memory problems. They've had antipsychotics, which clearly cause set shifting problems, so that if you're the kind of person who could remember all the phone numbers of all your friends, younger people here don't have to do that. You've got your iPhones, which does all the remembering for you. But back in the days when the controversies about ECT and memory blew up, people used to say, well, look, I was the kind of person who could remember all my friends and all the phone numbers and even the previous phone numbers that they had, and I can't do that now. Well, that's a set shifting problem, and the antipsychotics interfere with that. So by the time people come to ECT, they have memory issues. What's very hard to work out is what's causing them, what the component is from ECT, what the component is from all of the other treatments they've had. The only conceivable way to work that out is by teamwork. If doctors and nurses who know the patient and the person themselves and their family are involved in trying to tease it out, you've got some hope. If it becomes a contest between us saying we've got one kind of evidence on the one hand and the patient saying they've got a different kind of evidence on the other hand, that's a recipe for dispute.